Hey, Dom.
Hey, sorry, I just had a whole bunch of. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, you hear me okay?
Yeah, I hear you perfectly. Sorry, I just had a whole bunch of pop-up windows that I was closing out.
How's your dog poop situation okay?
Oh my gosh, it was just it was a little bit insane. This dog, we're babysitting him for the next, I guess today's the last day, but he has a bit of a sensitive stomach, and this hasn't happened before, but Samson, my boyfriend, was gone. He had to drive to the gym, and I'm
Yeah.
on crutches from post-surgery. So I just like come into the living room and I'm like, oh my God, something smells really bad. I was like, so I'm like on crutches trying to get everything together and wipe everything up. And thankfully, like Samson bought this like dog deodorizing spray for dog poop and pee situation. So
Yeah.
the smells like thankfully mitigated, but it was just a stressful time. It's like a stressful thing for like the first thing for you to wake up to be that.
Right. And
Yeah.
this is the glamorous life of a world champion. Don't you love
Yes.
that? Like people like see all your stuff on social media, like for me too, and it's like they think you live like this certain kind of way, and then like, nope, you're just dealing with dog poop like everyone else. Like,
I think honestly that is so funny you bring that up because someone not too long ago I was talking to them about like a possible new job opportunity and they were like a more corporate job, not anything art related, and she was like, you had a job? And I was like, yeah, like an actual like physical job. I work remotely, but still it was a real job. And she was like, I thought you just kind of like traveled around for a living. And I was like, wouldn't that be the dream? Like, I'm glad that's what you think
and it's
my
like
life
you don't
is.
get like paid like per royalty per chokehold, like
Yeah, that's what, and people are so quick to assume that like I can build a totally successful living off of just like being a jiu-jitsu person, like teaching seminars and everything. But I'm always like, listen, health insurance has to exist in my life because
right.
I just had surgery. You know, you have to be prepared for those moments where things don't go right in the gym.
That's like a perfect launching off point because I was just talking to a musician friend of mine yesterday, and we were having a similar kind of, conversational tangent about how people on, like, let's say, like metaphorically, the other side of the velvet rope, where they think that, let's say, you were on, or an artist might see where I'm on, and they think like, I want to get there. And like there for them is like this imaginary place of like you said, you're just traveling around and putting people in guillotine chokes and just getting money pouring on you like Jay-Z. And it's like, they think that's like life, but it's like you don't realize when you're doing what you love for work, it is work. And it's like you sometimes have to supplement your passion, and you sometimes have to supplement your work with many types of work. And like I'm wondering how you, as someone in your position, but also someone at your age and phase of life, like how are you reconciling all of that? Is there a side of you that's like, I'm the fucking world champion, I should have like billions of dollars? Or are you more like, yeah, are you more like, this, do you kind of play the hypothetical stuff that people play where it should be this way or it should be that way? Or do you kind of just go with the flow? Because I know from conversations we've had in the past, I know you definitely like think a lot about stuff, and I'm wondering how you think a lot about those things.
Yeah, what a great question and a great jumping off point. Thanks for asking that. I I'd like to say that when actually let's go back a little bit. So the way I was raised was always to kind of take on a little bit and do a lot with it. And that is because my parents wanted me to be successful as an immigrant, like in America. And they foresaw a future for me that was like being a billionaire right off the bat. Like as soon as you graduate college, you get that high paying finance job, you ruggedly work your way to the top, and then you're earning $1 million as your second year paycheck. And
I mean, who doesn't, right? Like who,
who
of
doesn't
course.
want a life filled with quaaludes and like staying up until 2 in the morning to work for a guy that's screaming at you, right?
The dream.
The dream. But I feel like that kind of work ethic that was instilled in me as a result of trying to just like really hyper focus on school and really hyper focus on jujitsu also came with this caveat of, well, you should get something in return just for doing the work. Does that make sense? Like it's
Yeah,
not
yeah,
necessarily
totally.
It's
Yeah.
not a reward like, oh, you become valedictorian or you graduate with top honors and you become a world champion, you get this gold medal. It's like, and
Right.
like, you remember that commercial in the 2000s where the guy is applying for a job interview and they're like, we're going to give you this amazing job with this amazing salary. And he's like, and stock options.
Yeah.
That's how I felt. I'm like, where are my stock options? What's going on?
Right.
You win a world championship, you should get sponsorships, you should get endorsements. You're basically LeBron James, right? And
Right.
it's
Totally.
unfortunately, jiu-jitsu is just, especially at that time, it was not so evolved. It wasn't so prominently in the public sphere. A lot of celebrities were doing it, but it wasn't some kind of big thing that was hyped up and people were really interested and intrigued by it. So I felt a little bit bittersweet about those wins because I did expect there to be kind of a change of lifestyle for me in some ways. But I forgot that I am a woman in jiu-jitsu. And at the time, it was very difficult to break through. Our mutual friend Emily Kwok will tell you, because she was a pioneer, that it was very, very difficult to be listened to have eyes trained on you, to even be hired for seminars and things like that, even at a high level. And slowly over time, I think that has changed, but I definitely kind of held this space in my heart where I was a little bit resentful for things not working out as they imagined, like in that metaphorical finishing line that I think some of us hold. Right now, I think my viewpoints have evolved a lot because I just feel like it takes up too much energy to think in those really narrow terms. I think that finishing line, while it might, whatever it is, you might cross it, like you could win the world championship, you could become this like incredible recognized artist, but it never looks the way you imagine it to be. Like, there's
Yeah.
always a little bit more work and a little bit more sweat and tears placed into the background, than you would think. And whatever kind of occurs after you cross it, it is what it is. And I think I've learned to just kind of be grateful for the journey aspect of it and just kind of the process of working to the finish line rather than the actual crossing of, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does make sense. I'm really curious how like the two sides of Dominyka work, or even if those are two different sides. Like I know you more, even though I intellectually know you've had all these amazing accolades and you're like super like badass girl. Like I know that from our friend Emily, like, but I more know you from meeting you on the beach and hanging out and getting pizza and just having normal talk. So I'm glad I'm coming into this conversation knowing you more as like a human and an artist. And I'm curious how you, as the little girl that grew up to be a woman that's still an artist, a visual artist, right? How that side of you sort of plays with the jujitsu side of you. Like I've had very limited, although I enjoyed it a lot, I limited experience with Brazilian jiu-jitsu. I want to get back to it eventually, but I do know I know enough that it's an art. I know enough that there's creativity involved, but I also know that from another angle, art is so subjective. Brazilian jiu-jitsu is so objective. It's not really like, well, do you think, she got him in a choke? I'm not really sure. Like it's very like definitive, where art's kind of like it could be whatever you want it to be. And it's like I feel like there's a side of you that like is very analytical, very logical, blah blah blah. But there's also the side of you that's like the dreamer, the side of you that like wants these things. And I'm wondering how those sides of you, if they're the same or if they're battling or if they get along with each other. How does that play out in your head?
Oh, what a fun question. I think actually, I wouldn't, I would say probably they're the same side in terms of like my personality or who I present myself as a human being. But I think internally they're two separate spheres. And I
Yeah.
think they've kind of existed my entire life. Like, I've always had two sides of me. I've had the side that I am to my family and my parents, and the side that I am to everybody else, kind of the side that I am to the outside physical world, and the side that I am internally, and then the side that I am, where I'm this like creative, kind of hippy dippy, loosey goosey person that's like, whatever happens, happens, whatever may come, I shall receive kind of human, to like, no, you have to work, you have to plan, you have to schedule, you have to organize. Champions are made with slight edge things. You can't just be lackadaisical about the way you approach a process. You have to be very considerate of it. And I think those sides, um, often battle because I will set myself to a goal, and the one side will be like, just let yourself approach this in a way that feels great for you, in a way that is speaking to your heart and making you enjoy the process and feel passionate about it. And the other side is like, no, if you want to succeed in this goal and if you want to like accomplish it in its highest extent or its highest version, you have to really be actionable. You have to do things that are going to be just like a staircase of events that will lead you to the goal in the strongest possible way. And it's very hilarious. I'm especially when I'm making art, because I think you can kind of see it in my art, and
Mm.
maybe you probably don't see it in my jiu-jitsu because it's all when I'm on the mats and I'm training. Again, the objectivity and the logic take hold, and it's like you have to accomplish what you came out here to do, which is to submit someone or to dominate a position. And there's a sequence of steps that you need to take to get there. There's no real room for play unless that is exactly what you're doing, in which case it's not a logical process anymore. It's not an objective process anymore. But with art, I align myself with whimsy and align myself with like enthusiasm and optimism and try to kind of personify these qualities in my work with color and with shape and form. And then there's also that part of me that's like, but make it like meticulous, make it obsessive. And that's where you see like a lot of repeating patterns in me trying very hard to create like a soft gradient of blending so that it looks almost like machine made, or just do like the tiniest little details in the world. And I actually have never even considered that until this question that you asked me. So it's so funny to see that in art, actually I'm able to express these two sides of my personality, and they kind of mesh together. And if maybe they don't look great together, they're talking points, or at least they're of interest to people who can see that there's a huge kind of contrast between what's actually going on in a singular piece.
Do you feel like you see some of your art practice, your creative process leak into your jujitsu? And I say that because like after our last conversation at the beach, I was like thinking about it after, and one of the things I found so fascinating, like talking to you, is like I realized as we were talking that like with jujitsu, you have like this structure and this like this theory, and then when you're in, and when you're rolling around, you don't really have time for that. You have to just sort of be intuitive and creative. And then with art, it's almost the opposite. Whereas like art's kind of like this creative, intuitive thing, but in order to be super successful at it, like in air quotes, you have to have like the structure and the discipline. And it's sort of like either way, it's like you're approaching it from one way and adding some of the other, and then this way you're doing the opposite. Um, I'm wondering like how the creative side of it, how the side of it of like just being intuitive and creative, how that plays into your jujitsu. Like, do you find yourself when you're rolling around or training, is it more about like let's take these moves, let's drill, or is it more about like just let go and see where it goes and let my vocabulary of moves and things you've learned just kind of take over and speak? Like, does that make sense? It's a weird question.
No, no, it makes total sense. I wish that I would like to also like hear your side of the story as well with this same exact question, because
Yeah,
I'm thinking
totally.
my answer might be so different from somebody who just started jujitsu and is also creative. So I'd be so curious to know how these things differ. I'm lucky enough that I've been in jujitsu for almost 16 years, or a little over 16 years, I think. And I was hyper competitive in it for about 10 years. So the way that my personal jujitsu processes evolved is different from other people. And I have thankfully this like entire database of muscle memory that exists in my body. So after my surgery, for example, once I've recovered, if you just put me on the mats, and I haven't trained for almost a year now, if you put me back on the mats, I'd still be able to roll and commit to moves that I've been doing for years and commit to processes that I've been doing for years. So my objectives will stay the same. If I'm going against somebody that's much stronger than me, I'll be way more offensive than if it's somebody that I know I can handle, because I know there's not room for play. And if you're going against someone stronger and their whole objective is to best you, is to dominate you, get to those positions and submit you, then you don't want to spend any time playing around. You want to to make sure that you're in those positions of power and that you have control of the situation. The way that I have come to view jiu-jitsu actually is less in terms of like visual arts and more in terms of physical arts like dancing.
Mm.
I always like to say that jiu-jitsu is kind of like, I say this to a lot of beginners because I want them to be a little bit less intimidated by it. It's like a ballroom dance, and your partner has learned a different choreography from you, and you guys are kind of tasked to pull one another into each other's choreography. And
Mm.
it's really awkward and stumbly at first, but it can be kind of beautiful once you do take them on this route and they kind of have no choice but to go along with whatever you're doing. And then it feels like very flowy, you know what I mean? And I actually when I was running my own program in a gym in Queens, New York, called Heinz Combat, I would always play only house music whenever we would train or roll or anything. And that is because it has that very distinct 4x4 beat.
Yeah.
And with the beat, you're kind of encouraged to move. Like, there's no one that sits there listening to house music when they're forced to and doesn't tap their foot or nod their head or do something to acknowledge the rhythm, because it's totally in tune with your heartbeat. It's in tune with all your systems. You want to flow with the music. And what happens when you're training is you want to keep in tune with the steps. So with every 4x4 beat, you want to make sure you're doing something every time that beat lands. And that
Right.
is going to encourage you to be moving, to be rotating, to be doing something, even if it's not to get to a better position. It's you actually just enjoying the process of motion alongside another person. I would maybe compare it to kind of like surfing a wave. Like, the wave is not something that you have control over, but
Mm.
it's something you kind of align yourself to, understand the shape of, and then understand how to move yourself alongside the shape. So I think the processes are definitely interlinked. But I think I'm just slowly starting to unearth how right now, because I've had some time apart and some more time to dive myself into the visual arts world.
Is there a creative element left? And I asked that coming from a place of like I grew up like skateboarding. That was like my thing, or one of my many things, I should say, as a kid. I never did like the whole referee whistle blowing type of sports. That was never my jam. But like I was into skateboarding, and I remember like there was a time when like it felt like all the tricks had already been done, and then someone did something crazy, and then someone else did something, and you're like, all right, that's as far as you can go. You can't go past that. And then someone does something where they like land on their wheels side, like a trick called a primo, where you land on your wheels and you're like standing on top of your wheels. Like, you shouldn't even be able to do that. Like, that's like against the rules. What are you doing? Like, and it's like I'm wondering from your perspective, is there room for creativity left over in that, jumping off from what you just said, like when you do kind of like let yourself into the artist mindset of Dominyka and you're rolling around, do you feel, or have you like created new combinations or new maneuvers or things that haven't been done before, or is it all already there and it's just mastering it?
Oh, I definitely have. I definitely have come up with new combinations, new positions, new movements. A lot of them actually stumbled upon by accident, because you'll get stuck in, as you're training, as you're rolling, as you're grappling, you'll get stuck in these positions that are usually a result of someone trying to evade something or evade a trap that you were setting up earlier. And you're like, how do I capitalize on this weird situation? Like, what can I do? And you notice that there is a limb out of place, or you notice that if you just shift your hips like 90 degrees, it'll be an entirely different position that's way more successful for what you're trying to do. And then you kind of troubleshoot to see if it works. And if it does, or if it came really close to working, then you troubleshoot even more and see how you kind of refine it. And I've done that a lot in my personal life, just because the gyms that I trained at for most of my competitive career, there weren't a lot of women in them. There are a lot
Mm.
more women now, but not at the time. And the women that were present, none of them were my size, none of them were my height. So it was really just a huge disadvantage for them to train with me, because I just had so much like force and power over them. I would try to mitigate it by like starting on my back, starting in defensive positions and going a little bit more slowly. but I would have to end up training with guys that were my size, and a 180-pound man versus a 180-pound woman, it's a little different, especially if like someone's taking steroids, or if someone is like
Yeah.
just weightlifting every single day and I have to go to college, it's just like it's different.
Right.
So I would have to figure out how to move myself in a more like noodly, evasive manner while still being offensive. And I think that's kind of that, plus the input of tons of coaches and like just amazing masters, has helped me develop the game that I have today.
Yeah.
But I think that jiu-jitsu is like always evolving, and it's easy to say that and then be like, oh, like the evolution is instead of grabbing the whole hand, you grab three fingers or something like that.
Right.
It's a little bit, it's
More
more
nuanced.
developed. Exactly. It's more than that. I think for myself, I kind of place myself on a like a cutoff right now because I see so much newness in jujitsu. A lot of it feels unapproachable to me, and not because I don't think I can do it. It's more that I really value my body, my body's integrity, and my ability to grow old and keep training without serious injury or like life-changing injury. And a lot of what's happening right now, I'll give you two examples. One is like, berimbolos, like there's a whole game that's set aside for berimbolos, which is when people kind of invert onto their backside and put all
Mhm.
of their weight on their upper spine and shoulders. Excuse me. And for myself, like I've seen people my age that started doing that kind of stuff very early on, they're starting to develop serious back problems from that. And I just have no interest in doing something that's gonna lead me down a path of just intense injury, herniated disc, all that jazz. Another one is heel hooks, which is like a very popular submission nowadays. We've been neglecting half of the body for a lot of time in jiu-jitsu, and now people are learning that they can attack a heel and turn that into
Mhm.
a very strong submission that eventually really compromises the integrity of your knee. And when you're training with people that are very optimized in that sort of game, it's there's a really high risk that you are going to injure yourself or they are going to injure you. And that is just because the submission is very difficult to escape without some kind of injury. And for me, again, I can figure out ways to like play into these games without fully integrating myself into them, just kind of touch the boundaries of them. But I just have no interest in putting myself in real danger for when I'm training, just because I've had so many injuries in my life. I've had so many just so many surgeries and things like this. I don't really want to compromise the rest of my jiu-jitsu career just because I'm so keen to evolve in those directions. I also think that we're going to eventually evolve away from those things as well. I think there's so much still left to be unearthed and explored. I think we noticed that over the last couple of years, people just started to use the uniform, the gi itself differently. And that's something new that we haven't really been playing around with too much. And I think people will learn maybe not how to uncover entire systems, but some particular movements or some particular techniques, we're going to see them kind of unfolding. Hopefully, I'll continue to keep unfolding techniques of my own.
Hmm.
But jujitsu really is never ending. Like if I were to compare it to painting, I would say that you have this like limited color palette, right? Humans have a limited visual sphere. They can see these colors and that's it.
Hmm.
Well, we can see those colors, but we can also do something completely different with those colors. We can like change the way we apply them. We can change the processes of applying them. We can mix them. We can place colors next to each other that create different kind of emotional effects. And I think that's kind of how I compare it to.
I love the way you were describing kind of creating or kind of riffing off of like existing moves and switching it around, because it kind of makes me think of like art, like when I'm painting and you sort of like work yourself in a corner, whether it's like you were mentioning like a weird color combination or like twisting around the subject matter or doing something that's kind of like in your uncomfortable zone, and you're kind of like, well shit, I got in this place, I got to work myself out of it, I have to make it work, and like connecting with the music. I was talking to my friend, and we were saying how like which music kind of connects us while we're painting and whatnot, and I was saying how like jazz for me does sort of, I guess, what house music does for you. I catch my brush bouncing with like the bass, and I love how like jazz sort of like goes to these places and then improvises and does something totally weird, and I kind of find that connecting to my art. I'm curious something you wrote in your bio. You mind if we get a little deep for a second?
Yeah, let's do
Um,
it.
it was interesting. One of the things that you chose to write in this bio, it's not a super long bio, but you made sure to include by intention, I'm sure, that you weren't allowed out of your house when you were young. What's that all about? Because that was definitely me, and I'm like wondering what was your story, and that probably
Okay.
and how I'm sure it did, but how did that affect you as an artist? Because being alone and being locked in definitely kind of is good fertile breeding ground for being an artist.
I totally agree. Yeah, let's definitely dive into that. So, I had just really, really strict parents, really strict upbringing, more so than other people, more so than American strict, I'll say. I was not allowed to go to other people's houses. I was not allowed to have people over. I was not allowed to learn how to drive. I was not allowed to do a lot of things. And as a result of that, I spent a lot of time just kind of focusing on jujitsu, just focusing on school. My day would start, I would wake up at 6 o'clock, go get breakfast, go to school, come back home, do a little homework, go to practice, come home at like 10:30, start my homework, and then repeat the whole process day in, day out. And I didn't really have a lot of time to spend outside of that process. I had a lot of awesome friends in high school, but they never saw me outside of school. We purely had social media and texting relationships, and once in a while, like a birthday party. And it's just, I think my parents were working really hard to be protective and to try and keep me out of a bad way. They didn't want me to enter into drugs or the party scene or just kind of fuck my life away, you know. They
Yeah.
were probably afraid that because I had kind of a shock to the system because as I was growing up in Lithuania, I actually didn't see my parents for quite a long time. Um I was being raised more so by my grandparents, my two sets of grandparents, and then all the cousins and aunts and uncles that would come in and out of my life.
Okay.
And I sort of like learned that those were my family, those individuals were my family. And
Yeah.
when I was moved to America, it was quite a shock to the system for me to experience my parents as like the people in my life that were going to exist there
Mm.
because they weren't there. So for 6, 7-year-old me, I was like, I don't know, are we gonna go back to that other place? That place was cool. I remember that place with all those other people. That place was awesome. Are we gonna go back there? And no, unfortunately we didn't. So I think they were a little bit afraid that because of like the shock to my system and the shock of growing up in New York and then later New Jersey, I was going to want to act out. I was going to have these like, you know, teenage episodes where you do the wrong thing and you fall off of whatever path you're on and kind of compromise your future. None of that really happened, I'm happy to say, but all the after effects of just being kind of stunted and confined to a singular space and singular individuals was quite difficult for me. And so I found a lot of solace in all kinds of art. I tried to teach myself how to dance through YouTube tutorials. I would kind of like make my own music videos like that weren't recorded or anything, but I would just kind of like set the scene and everything. I would obviously draw and paint and like just make all these like crazy little what do you call them? I completely forgot. Collages. I would make collages. So I tried to be as creative as I could within these confined kind of parameters. I was fortunate enough to live in like a nice middle class and then later upper class household. So I had resources, I had a computer that I could use. And so I was always like dicking around on the internet and I was always trying to learn new processes. Like I couldn't afford Photoshop, but I learned about sumo paint. So I started messing around on sumo paint and things like that. And I also existed a lot on these like really funny they're like social networks, but they had this like do you remember Neopets? It was kind of like
Vaguely.
you had a pet attached to you, but it was more of like a social network thing where you had an avatar and they would just like spend your time with your avatar talking to other people online.
Yeah.
Dangerous grounds for kids. But as a result of like being on these websites, I actually I was able to really lean into my art because I would start to sell people like digital or pixel art of their avatars, of food items, of whatever, just whatever I could think of that pertained to the website for that website's currency. And I was like, wow, like, oh, you can actually make money doing art. It's not real money, but you can make art into some sort of business. And then that's, I think, when I slowly started to believe that I actually could turn art into something that could potentially be a career in my future. But anyway, in terms of just being stuck in that house, it was quite a difficult time. And I think art was definitely a great escape for me. And I think right now how it kind of fits into my lifestyle and my art right now is I'm very grateful kind of every day to wake up and be able to do whatever the fuck I want because I'm an adult and I have access to amazing things and resources and I can go outside and do things with people. But I also always want to kind of cherish freedom a little bit and cherish one's ability to grow kind of independently. And I think that's why a lot of my art has to do with like really bright colors and kind of like all this plant life because I'm really considering the fact that you can just kind of leave some organisms alone completely and they'll be totally fine. Like they have all the processes they need. They have the sun, they have water from rainfall, and they can just exist like trees or some plants, even bugs. And boy, if some parents could just look at that and say, okay, you know, if I could just leave my kids alone, maybe that will encourage them to grow or seek what it is that their heart really wants. It's not just sitting in a room alone, like playing video games, even though that is totally a viable career move now. You can totally just
Yeah.
become a video game champion. But there's a process of growth that can happen if you just leave something alone and let it grow independently. So I think that's where kind of the effects of my upbringing trickle down into some of the artwork that I make today.
So interesting and like refreshing because I had a very similar upbringing and
Really?
very like overly sheltered. Like we'd have to like next time we hang out, I'll have to compare notes on how sheltered we were. But like I couldn't go anywhere. Like literally my neighborhood, like going like 3 4 blocks away. It was like, all right, call me when you get there. All right, call me. I'm like 2 blocks away. Like, all right, call me when you leave. And then I first got my license. It was like I started driving to high school. It was like, all right, call me from the payphone as soon as you get there. And it was like couldn't go anywhere. I didn't have any social life. I was completely like so awkward and just shut off. And I can't lie and say I wasn't resentful of that. I think it probably had some good like reverberation effect in my life, but I definitely like kind of rebelled, from that in college, and I don't think it's a good move. So I'm definitely not trying to do that to my kids, but there's give and take, and it definitely does for in my case too. Like it definitely does feed the artist persona. um, and speaking of art, I definitely want to talk more about your art. I was like diving into your website a little bit, and I've been following you since we kind of connected originally, but it was nice to like kind of dive in and like really explore. It's so interesting. I like find like your earlier work has like structures within structures within structures, like meticulous. You could kind of like see the evolution of like you as a person and an artist, like going from these like almost like algorithmic patterns and whatnot. And then as you kind of like, you can see you're kind of like stretching your arms out of your comfort zone, and then it gets really loose, and then you can see you kind of dive back into like, oh, but I need a little bit of structure, and then you're like, well, how loose can I go, and like how simple can I go? Well, never mind, I'm gonna go back to really super complex. Like I'm wondering where do you find your art self is at now, and like how do you see that evolution, like on a path from where you were to where you are now, and like where you potentially want to be going with your art?
I had not a professor, I think, say this, but a teacher's assistant when I was in college. I was taking some art classes. I think this was a painting or a drawing class. And she said we were assigned to butcher one of our pieces. We spent a long time creating this like a charcoal piece of I don't even think there was an assignment for what we had to do. I think I drew like a dead deer or something like that. I don't even know why. And she was like, you have to butcher this art piece and you have to turn it into something new. And I don't care how you do it, it just has to be done. And a lot of people were kind of like, why would I do that? Like I just spend so much energy and work and time on this freaking charcoal piece. Like none of us even like charcoal. And she was like, it's not about making something that is like looks a certain way or has to be structured a certain way or you put a lot of time into it. She's like, just fuck it. Just say fuck it. Just make something new. Like it don't be attached to your art. Just keep making new things. Like, and if you don't like something, move on from it. If you don't like something, mess it up, like do something else with it. And I think that really struck me. I was like, oh, and I remember we had a private conversation and she was like, yeah, you can't just think that every piece you make is going to be the next big piece of your life. You can't just think that it's going to be like this big life-changing thing. Like when musicians make albums, I don't think they make albums to be like, this entire album is going to be like all the greatest songs of my entire career. Like you maybe have one or two that are like, wow, I really went there. Like I really pushed the boundaries of myself as a musician and what I've been doing, but not all of them. And she's like, you can't just kind of align yourself to this ideology that you have to be perfect and everything you make has to be something that is going to be looked at the MoMA 100 years from now, and people are going to be like, she's a genius. Like, I can't believe she did that.
Yeah.
No, that was life-changing advice because up until that point, like I was obsessed with structure, obsessed with like rigidity, like everything has to be meticulous and perfect and has to look a certain way to me. Like it has to be perfect to me. And to be able to exit outside of that viewpoint was insane to me. And even now, I actually just finished a drawing the other day, like a marker drawing. I've gone back to that a little bit and I looked at it and the colors are not colors that I use. Like I don't like those colors together. I'm not a huge fan of cool tones. I think in my work, like I'd rather have both, like, or an overwhelming majority of warm tones. And
Okay.
this was this was more cool toned. And I was like, man, I don't like this. And as I'm working on it, I'm forcing myself to like work through it and see what I can do with it and how I can mess with it and what would feel good to add to it. And I keep thinking like, I don't like this. I don't like this. Everything I'm adding just is not me. It's not like it has elements of me, but it's too loose. Like it's too, you can see the lines where the marker overlaps. And I hate that. I always want to
Yeah.
hide that. And I was like looking at it after I was done after some time. I just left it on the floor in the living room and I came back to it and I was like, huh, okay. I see what's going on here. And I'm not mad. I wouldn't change it. I'm not gonna mess with it anymore, but it's cool. I get it. Like I get where I'm going with this. And I think had I just stayed in that little ingrained kind of sheltered kid mindset, stuck in a box, trying to be perfect all the time, I'd never accept myself to make work or even finish work that I wasn't 100% sure was going to be like this amazing thing that I could show off and just be so proud of. And everyone just pulls out their phones and they're like, oh my gosh, you're incredible. And now I'm like, I don't care. Like, I understand now that what you make is entire, it does not matter what anybody thinks about what you make. Like it matters insofar that there's some sort of emotional reaction, because I guess that means that there's some sort of connectivity there. Somebody sees something in your work and it resonates with them. But it doesn't matter what they think at the end of the day. I really don't. Like if that person isn't like funding my entire existence, like maybe then I would care more. But now I'm like, if I can just create to create and create to produce something that I look at and it is reflective of where I am in my life and kind of what I'm doing, and I can see the growth pattern, I can see the changes that occur in my life within this like visual format, that's all I need. And that's all I'm really happy with.
Is it though? Like I ask it
Love
because it's
that.
like I ask it because it's like, you're someone who obviously knows what it's like to like see a finish line or to have like a mountaintop, right? You see it clearly. You wouldn't be achieving the shit you're doing if you weren't like looking at an opponent or looking at an abstract thing, an accolade. What is that, or does it exist with your art? Is there something with your art where you're like, you know, that's where I want to get to. That's what I want to achieve. This, like, what is that version of that for you as an artist?
I think I have because we talked about like specificity and finish lines not always being a great thing. I think I have like general like goals. Like if I guess the first goal would be to have some sort of disposable income, like regular disposable income, whatever that is. If it's like $50 a month, if it's $100 a month, whatever that may be, and incrementally change the goals as I'm changing as a human being. So maybe it becomes less about making money from art. Maybe it becomes more about pushing the boundaries of art. Like I set myself a goal for after I'm done with the surgery where I'm able to be more mobile and don't need to use my crutches after I'm done with the surgery, after I'm done with like my recovery process on
Yeah.
crutches, to create a sculptural piece that uses some materials that I'm not very familiar with, but I was talking it over with an artist friend in Switzerland and she was kind of guiding me through it. So I'm more excited about that really than kind of working towards like a established very particular career in the way that I've imagined it when I was a kid. Just like you get hired by somebody, like you get hired by a gallery, or you get you have a collector that's just like, I'm amazed with your work, sign me up for the next 10 paintings. You just kind of have to produce. So right now I'm in a funny little limbo where I'm trying to establish, like I'm trying to set the groundwork, like as we've talked about before, like make sure that I have these like processes in place to drive people to my website, to drive people to my Instagram, to see these like videos of the process, and to also just kind of reach out and try to seek opportunities out for myself. But I also feel like with art, not like with jiu-jitsu, there's no timeliness. Like you can make work at your own pace. You can take years for a work to finish and it'll be just as great as a work that took a month to finish. You know what I mean? And
Mhm.
there's also no timeliness in the way that your art is seen by other people or who sees it or how it's received, even if it is received. Whereas with jujitsu, it's very kind of concrete. Like train, you train hard or you train as a hobbyist. And if you train hard, then the likelihood is that you're going to compete. And if you compete, you're either going to win or you're going to lose. And if you lose, you have a blueprint for what you need to work on. If you win, you still need to work on certain things, but now you have a little bit of an edge to your name, and you can use that to turn it into something else for yourself, whether that's like pursuing a more serious career in jiu-jitsu or looking for other opportunities. But the path is kind of like laid out and there is a timeline attached. The younger you are, the more access to resources you have, the less responsibilities you have. If you don't have a family, you don't have people to take care of, the easier it is for you to accomplish those things. But I think with art, even though those responsibilities and those other outside world things will come into your process and affect how you work and how well you're able to work, there isn't a set parameter for like, I have to do this by a certain time period. Like I have to do this before I'm 30. I have to do this before I'm 35. And I think that has allowed me to kind of relax a little bit because I felt like with every surgery, with every injury, I was like, oh my God, I'm behind. I'm behind in jiu-jitsu. I have to work twice as hard now to make sure that I can still keep up or still best people. I have to find secret hacks for myself that just keep me on this path and just keep me working really hard to make sure that I'm not falling behind. But I don't feel that same pressure with art, even though I feel pressure to evolve and I feel pressure to work hard and work to the hardest extent of what I'm used to, like just for my own integrity and not to mess around, you know.
Yeah.
I don't feel this overwhelming pressure to um, make something right now as it is and just be great, because I feel like that's so unrealistic and I think it will really just cripple me because it will take me away from the whole reason why I'm doing art. It's just turning me into somebody that wants to be an assembly line or like a factory, you know what I mean? And I don't know if you watched this TV show recently. I know we were talking about TV shows earlier. It's called The White Lotus. It's on HBO.
No, I don't think so. Is it good?
I think it is pretty good. I think given the collection of TV that we have right now, TV shows, I think it's pretty good. It's up there. I'm pretty sure a
Okay.
lot of people won Emmys for it. But there was a woman in the show and she said something that kind of like really resonated with me. And she was talking to her fiance or her husband, I think, and she was like, I think she's a journalist. I really think that maybe I'm just not great. Like, there are some people out there that are just really great, talking about their journalism careers. And she's like, and maybe I'm just not one of them. Like maybe I don't have it. Like
Yeah.
whatever it is they have, I don't have it. And I was like so shocked she said that out loud, because that is something that I have thought about anything that I've ever done in my life, especially art, especially jiu-jitsu, where I'm like, maybe I'm just not great. Maybe I'm just not one of those people. And then when this amazing thing snuck up on me where I became a world champion, and not once, like 10 times in my life, I was like, wait, hold on. I am one of those people, but I still don't think that I am. Like I understand that I have the accomplishments to back me up, but it doesn't feel like
Right.
I'm amazing. It doesn't like I don't feel like I'm LeBron James. I just feel like a human being, an average Joe that climbed into some successful person's body and achieved something in that moment, and then climbed out as soon as the moment was over. And so I noticed those little tricks that occurred when I was competing, and these things that were happening that were kind of giving me this mindset of like, oh, a greatness is not all that you think it is. And I'm trying really hard to learn from those lessons of my past and apply them into the way that I view my art and my art career as well.
I so totally relate to everything you just said. Like the
Nice.
whole, the like fist bump, what? The
Yeah.
whole like imposter syndrome is so real. And it's cool that you brought that up because it relates to something that I wanted to like ask you about. Well, first of all, to take a slight tangent before I get to that subject, have you read any of Eckhart Tolle's books at all? Like Power of Now or A New Earth. They're amazing. You should definitely read them. But he like talks about in A New Earth, he talks about like the ego. Most of the book is about the human ego. And like he talks about it or describes it as like anything that makes you feel like superior or inferior to someone or something else. And so, like a lot of times in our society, people will say, "Oh, he has an ego problem. She has an ego problem," meaning like, "Oh, I'm tough. I'm the greatest. I'm fucking awesome, whatever." But it's also the opposite, where I'm like, I'm terrible. I'm not as good. And it's like I'm wondering what kind of relationship you have with ego, because there must be moments where even though you just said like you sort of experience like imposter syndrome, I'm sure there has to be, you're human, there has to be moments where you're like fucking awesome, like there has to be that side of it, right, where someone's like, oh my god, can I get a picture with you, or whatever kind of stuff you experience, right? And so how have you learned to get along with your ego, and what sort of battles or victories or agreements have you made with your ego, both on the art side as well as on the jujitsu side?
Oh, wow. This is such a good question. I'm very non-linear. I'm very much cyclical, like most things in life. Like I will have my period of like rise where I feel like the shit, and then I fall
Yeah.
back down to humility where I'm thinking
Yeah.
about everything terrible that I've ever done in my entire life.
Same. Yep.
I think what's interesting is remember you were talking about those kind of like split personalities earlier. Um when I was in my competitive prime, I had to have this kind of ego within the margins. Like it was an ego that I accessed at certain points, and I had to maintain it with me, because if you don't have an ego as an athlete, you will not have success as an athlete unless you achieved your state of egolessness later in your athletic career, and you manage to turn your like physical process into something that's automatic, and you don't really have to access your brain for it, or your mindset. Like you don't have to access your emotions for it. Your ego is kind of, to me, what drives you to want to do anything, because your ego is more related to you enjoying the pleasures of life and you enjoying things that you want to do, whether they're good or bad for you. It has this motivating aspect to it where if you want to enjoy the pleasures of life, you have to do something to acquire them, whatever they may be. Like there still has to be work put in to get to them.
Mm.
And I would kind of step into this role of this person who thought that she was just absolutely the best in the world, like the best. I would tell myself before tournaments, like especially the day of, when you're in this like little cordoned off area that we call the bullpen, where you kind of check in to make sure that you're placed where you need to be and your weight is on point and you're just kind of there warming up. That's where most people kind of, I think, break or set themselves up for success, because you start to really feel the nerves there. You're surrounded by all your other competitors and the people you might be fighting like within 5 minutes. And you're just like, oh my God, here we go. This is happening. And a lot of people can get carried away by those nerves and get carried away by this thought of like, am I ready? Did I do enough? Am I good enough? And you start to have this whole internal dialogue about what the meaning of your life is and what the meaning of how you are as a person is. And I would just reject all of that and sit there and just tell myself, like, you're the best. You're the best. Everything you've done is the best you could do. Nobody here can beat you. Even if somebody gets you in terms of like they score points on you or you're not in the best position, you're still going to figure out a way to get yourself that raised hand, that medal, because you're just the best. And this is like your hero's journey. What also helped was that I hardcore believed in God at the time. I don't anymore. I have a different sort of spirituality and a different version of God. But at the time, I believed in a white-haired man with a white beard. And I was like, God has me. He has my back. Like, that's it. And that actually is really helpful. Like when you
So
believe
God's
in,
like a super like BJJ fan.
yes,
He's like,
yes,
oh,
God
you
is just
gotta
like,
crush this. Oh
he's
my
just
God, I can't wait.
infusing you. He's like, you're the girl that never leaves her house. She's not allowed to leave her house. We're gonna give you this because you
Yes.
can't leave your house. You need something to balance out what's happening at home. So I would just kind of wear this costume of this person who's just like, I am the shit. Like, nope, I'm untouchable. And of course, again, all that gets thrown out as soon as I step off the mats. And I'm just like this silly, goofy person that's like, I can't believe I did it. I was so scared. And I feel like it's so funny that I whenever I've talked on podcasts about it, I'm so open about it. I'm like, yeah, this is like my mindset preparation. I enter this like hyper ego form of myself where I'm just like, I'm the best, I'm the greatest, no one can touch me. And it helps. It totally helps you be a better competitor and it helps you win. And if you're not doing it and you're an elite competitor, like I don't know how you're managing to accomplish what you're accomplishing, because to me I feel like that's an integral part of the process. And then when you stop competing and you stop being forced to place yourself in these scenarios, then it's very curious because your ego doesn't have this like super performative outlet. Now you're just a human out in the world and everything you do is like your own action. I think competition is very much like, I feel like things are kind of like you're just allowed allowances as a competitor, kind of like you're an actor on a stage. You're allowed to do certain things that you wouldn't be allowed to do as a human being, like out in the world.
Right.
And when you're only being a human, you're not being a competitor, you're only doing certain things, you have to be way more, I think, deliberate about how you interact with your ego. Because if you're just thinking you're the best and you're the greatest of all time, all the time, that's so unhealthy, dude. Like, that's so unhealthy. That's the best way to just kind of, I think, ruin your life. Because if you think you're the greatest you've ever been at that point, and you ever think of something greater for you to do, what's going to happen to you if you never get there? Like, what is going to happen to your internal self if you have put all of your energy into being the greatest and you seem to have come short? I think right now that my relationship with my ego is this sort of tender balance where I let it lead me and be this kind of like like the dog on a leash that is just guiding me kind of towards where I need to go, because I will listen to my heart and I will listen to what feels right before I will sit down and consider all the pros and cons. Like if I notice something that really resonates with me or speaks to me, I'm that kind of spiritual person where I'm just like, oh, this is meaningful. Like, we can talk about the pros and cons later, but right now we need to chase this. And then all the other components working against the ego, everything that's saying like, be considerate, be humble, understand that this might not be because you're the chosen one. It might just be because of circumstance.
Right.
Those come in after when maybe I'm a little bit too high on my horse and I'm just like a little bit too invested in my own greatness, because I think, again, if you just think you're great, you're probably not going to want to put in the work. Like, I think a little bit of you needs to think, I'm not the best. I need to work towards being the best. Or I'm not where I want to be. I need to work towards where I want to be. And that's where I think the underside of the ego comes in. I guess, I mean, in psychology, we learn about the super ego and the ego, right? So I guess
Yep.
a super ego is what I would call that, like this more rational, more like reserved part of you that's like, let's be more considerate of the process. Let's be a little bit less on the nose about everything.
I think that keeps you humble too. I think it's important to like always remain hungry and always remain partly a student and sort of force yourself into like an underdog role. I feel like that's very important because you can quickly get high on your own supply and forget that like, it took a certain amount of effort to get to this place, whether it's art, being a parent, jiu-jitsu, whatever it might be. Like it takes a lot of effort to get where you did. And then when you get to wherever that is, I'm wondering, jumping off of that, are you someone that like celebrates victories, or is it like, okay, what's next? What's next? I was like reading in your blog a bit. You have a really great, really well articulated blog on like stagnation and like how you hate kind of keeping still and you always have to push forward. And I'm like wondering how that kind of like impacts your life, because it's really hard to like sort of be content and happy if you're always like, all right, that's great. I won this world championship, but I got to go to something. What's next? And then sort of related to that, if you want to kind of weave this into your answer, I'm wondering how that sort of identity with, achieving those things, how that impacts you on a level of like when you have a big injury or when you can't train for a year. It's like, do you feel like a part of you is ripped out and you're suffering and you're not as worthy? Like riff off of that a little bit, Dom.
Oh, I love that. Oh man. Yeah. Yeah, I had like a really difficult conversation with a really close friend of mine a long time ago. And we had gotten into an argument, and we were sitting at a diner in Queens, and she told me kind of point blank that me and my boyfriend at the time were not going to work out. And we had been together for, I think, 4 years or 3 years maybe at the time. No, I think 4 years. And we were living together. And I was like, I've never heard anybody say anything like that to me. And I was just like so shocked. And I was like, why do you think that? And she was like, it's so easy to see because you are always trying to grow and change, and he just isn't. So either you're going to have to change your entire worldview and way of being to just be okay where you are and learn how to deal with that, or he's going to have to learn how to change and grow. And I think he's very like content with where he is in life and he's satisfied. And it's not good to try and pull someone out of a place where they feel like happy. And
Yeah.
I was just so, it was the first time someone had read me like that. And after she said that, I couldn't stop seeing it. I couldn't stop seeing this like drive to seek out new things and have new experiences and do like always be learning, always be a student, as you said. It never registered. It never registered until that moment. And then I just thought, wow, like that's very true. In jujitsu, like you're forced to do that. You're forced to always evolve and change and metamorphosize what's going on because you have to. You have to stay along the game. You have to chase what everyone else is doing in a way just to be aware of it. Um, and then in life, I just have always been I think, I guess, making up for lost time for that, from that sheltered childhood where I'm like, I have to experience new things now that I have freedom and I
Yeah.
have resources. What a waste it would be if I just kept doing the same thing over and over again, just sat in my house and like really did nothing about it. um so it can be difficult at sometimes because when I was younger, it would really affect me super negatively if I was in a stagnant place. Like if I was physically sitting still or physically even forced to stay in one environment for too long. Like I can't be in a house for too long. I can't be in one location for too long. Like I have to move around. I don't feel good being anchored in. And now I just see it as a blessing. I just see it as opportunities for me to consider outside of what I know to be true. And I think I had another conversation with someone, and he said something that was like so awesome to me. We were talking about Buddhism, and I think this was like either a joke from a stand-up comic or just some quote that he had read off the internet.
Okay.
And he said, I've traveled all over the world and I've spoken to every person that I could think of, and I've considered every idea just to realize that I don't know anything at all. And I feel the same way. Like I feel like with every new thing that I come up with to do in my way of being, of change and integrating new things, I just realize that I really don't know that much. Like I could always know more and I could always explore more. And I can always restart the process of living in these like microcosmic ways. I used to feel very bad if I couldn't be in that process, like visibly, physically undergoing some sort of change. Because if I'm going through that phase in my life, I feel motivated, I feel excited, I feel passionate, I feel like things are coming together in this like new, amazing way, and I'm problem solving, and it just feels great. Like I thrive in that mode, even if it's stressful, even if it's overwhelming. If I had to pull all-nighters, I still thrive there. Where I don't thrive, where I feel the most stressed out is when I'm just sitting idle, you know? And I did a lot of work in my early mid-20s, like 23, 22, where I just tried to make peace with being idle or not undergoing change. I delved really deep into a spiritual side of myself because I was surrounded by a lot of very spiritual people, and I meditated a lot. I did a lot of yoga. I did a lot of body work. I did a lot of just kind of sitting with my thoughts and trying to understand where these pulls were all coming from. And I felt okay. I didn't feel great. I didn't feel like joyful or anything like that. I think that process kind of takes you out of joy because it's telling you, hey, you don't have to feel depressed, but in order to learn or unlearn feeling depressed, you have to kind of unlearn feeling. And if you unlearn feeling, you lose all the positives too, which is why I think ego is so integral. Is because even though it makes you feel shame and all that bullshit, it also makes you feel joy and bliss. So I moved away from that way of being and I went back to like allowing myself to want to always be this like on the move creature. And I think somehow I have learned to experience change on a tiny, like totally minuscule, microscopic level and still feel good. When I have dealt with injury before, I had a really serious shoulder surgery in, I think, 2011. No, 2016, I think. I was out of training for 6 to 9 months, and this was the biggest surgery I had had to date. And it was also the most unnerving because I was living with a family that was not my own, because I was not speaking to my family. We were taking time apart. I was right off the cusp of a big win again. And after you win, it's like, get your seminars in, get your training in, keep going off this momentum of the train that's moving forward. And when you're injured, you can't do that. And
Right.
it feels so unsettling because you're like, I have all these opportunities that I just can't capitalize on because I'm injured. And that was really stressful. I was completely depressed for probably like the entire 3 or 4 month period of like the initial recovery stages before I could even step foot into the gym again. And I remembered how that felt, and I didn't think that I would feel that way after this surgery. I considered that I might feel that way, but I just didn't think that I would. I felt like I had grown to cherish being on the mats rather than think that I had to be there. or just enjoy the moment rather than like thinking I have to be someplace. And I knew that was going to come. Like, I know that you're going to resent not being able to do certain things after surgery. And I know that that can make someone really, really sad and really just crestfallen. So I just tried to be aware of that fact that that might come. And what I did instead was I tried to set myself some goals that were kind of just like, imagine you had all the time in the world, like you were never going to die. You just have all the time in the world to do whatever you want. Like, what do you want to do? And I was like, well, if I can't move, then I want to make art, but I can't really feasibly paint because it's so much work and so much mess to deal with. And when you can only use crutches and you don't have people around you all the time to help you, it's really difficult to like make work like that. So I was like, why don't you just go back to drawing something that's simpler for you, even if it's not something that is like sellable or something that you can use like for your portfolio. Why don't you just like mess around? Why don't you try to learn something new, like learn a new skill? So I enrolled in some classes on Illustrator, Illustrator for like design of objects and clothing as well, and like a little bit of music production as well, because I messed around on a Fruity Loop studio years ago and I really enjoyed it because I was trying to edge my way into the house world. And after surgery, I kind of just like let myself fall into these things and I felt so fine. I felt so at peace. I had my moments where I wanted to cry because I was in pain or because I just felt like it's a stressful time. Like, it's overwhelming to be kind of relying on other people when you're so used to being independent, and feel the pain that you feel and understand that it's a long road ahead. Even though it's the beginning of a certain journey, it's still a long, long road ahead. I still felt like very calm and very fine about just having these like smaller things to focus on. They weren't these like big life-changing goals. And I think jujitsu spoiled me in this way of like showing me that, hey, there's this like amazing laid out path for you to become a world champion. All you have to do is XYZ and you'll get there. But with other things in life, it's just not like that.
Yeah.
Like, even if you want to have a child, you don't know if you're fertile. You don't know if you're going to be able to carry a baby to term. You don't know if you're going to have the child that you want, if it's a boy or a girl, if it's going to be someone that maybe has like a developmental issue. You just don't know. Like, you just have to accept all the randomness that life gives you and kind of roll with it. And I realized that the unrealistic path that jujitsu gave me and kind of showed me that this is the way that life occurs. Similar with school. School tells you school, college, or trade, and then job, right? Whatever job that you studied for. And that's it. That's how life goes. And it's just not that simple. And I just let myself understand that whatever was going to happen in my future was going to be within my control in terms of how much work I could put into things and how much I could grow myself. But everything else was going to be so random. So why even kind of worry about it at this time where I really can't do anything about it? So it's been a much more peaceful process, I should say. And I think I'm pretty pleased by that because it tells me that I'm growing. I'm not making the same mistakes or entering the same mindsets I did when I was 20 anymore. It's also encouraging to know that like I am becoming a more relaxed person about what I can do and what is within my control as I grow older. So really looking forward to turning 30 later in life.
It's funny, like just life perspective is so weird. But before I get into that, it's like so interesting because like all these different like I don't want to say career paths, but all these different pursuits that you have are like some of the most unlikely ways to make a living, and like such like talk about like I want to make a living as a jiu-jitsu champion or an artist. It's like, okay, maybe pick something else. It's like so funny how people like us, like we see the most unlikely paths as being completely possible. And that's like, it's really cool and it's really magical, that side of an artist or an athlete or someone that it doesn't matter what logic says or what the statistics say. It's like we feel this pursuit, we feel this passion, we feel this calling, and God, it's humbling to think about that. you had mentioned a couple things. I want to ask you this question based on, you mentioned like you once were religious, now you're not. You're talking about like you're already kind of implying that you're thinking about being a mom. Like I'm wondering like how your spiritual life has evolved, and like if you have a spiritual practice or a mindfulness practice, and kind of talk about some of those topics, like wherever that takes you in your head.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh man, I was such a Catholic kid. I loved God. Like I have a tattoo on my foot that's 3 J's in a triangle, and 2 of those J's are for jujitsu, and one of them is for Jesus. And I think it's like so wholesome. Like I don't regret that tattoo at all. I'm just like 16-year-old you really had her priorities like in one line. Um, I will be so frank. I lost my religion the first time I did mushrooms. I immediately
Yes.
was just like, oh, and I don't know if other people have this experience when they first take mushrooms, but what happened to me was I kind of just laid down and kind of put my hands over my head, and I felt like I saw the entire creation of the world. I felt like I saw this like amorphous blob that is supposed to be consciousness, and then it like fractures so it can like witness itself, and then it just keeps fracturing, and then it's like, oh, I want to experience the physical world and being physical and like sensation, and then it just turns into like organisms. And I kind of just saw this entire like process of the world unfolding in front of me, and that could just totally be like nonsense. It could be nonsense that my brain came up with
Right.
with the help of mushrooms to help me understand the world better, because maybe I was already feeling strange about my relationship to God, maybe.
Right.
But I also felt like it was very true to how I am as a person and how I consider life. And I kind of just really like accepted this viewpoint and accepted the fact that like kind of we're all one, we're all a part of one consciousness, and we're part of this like circle of life eternal that's always moving. And maybe a part of it is reincarnation, maybe a part of it has motifs related to like Hinduism and Buddhism, but it's not like a my spirituality is not something that's like just a concrete set of ideas that pull from specific things. It's kind of something that is just related to me trying to understand perspectives and trying to understand people a bit better, knowing that while I am just a speck in the wind, I'm also like incredibly powerful, and I am like a like I was talking to these people who are burners, like they're huge Burning Man
Yeah.
people. And
Did you ever go?
no, I really want to
I
though.
wish I went. That's like a regret. I wish I had done that. That seems
Okay,
like
well, we will plan it, because they have an in, and they're like, you have to come out next year. And I'm like, let's do it. Let's go. So you will get an invitation in the mail, my friend.
except I have three
Um,
kids, so it's probably not going to happen.
bring the kids. Yeah, no,
Yeah,
no.
cool.
You'll be the coolest guy in the Sandlot. I was talking to the guy of the couple, and I was like, yeah, I was considering all these things about God. And he was like, Lori, get over here. And Lori's his wife. She's like, what? And he's like, she's talking about what is God? What do you think God is? And she's like, it's all of us, man. We're all God. And I was like, nice. Okay, yes, that's what I think too. So that was just like the whole evolution process. And again, I think my personality is all about change. So I think that has not stopped evolving either. I had an amazing class with Professor Brian Greene at the college that I went to. And Professor Greene is like a extremely renowned physicist, and the class was not just about physical science, it was about metaphysics as well. It was about the idea of consciousness, the idea of miracles and things like this, and how they can all kind of be explained in a physical way, and how he basically introduced physics as his religion or his spirituality to us, and I had never considered that before. So I
Total.
sort of also started to consider the fact that physics could be like this spiritual process, like the idea that it's not things are fated or you have freedom of choice. It's that you do have freedom of choice, but the blueprint of your entire life has already been written down, because time doesn't exist. It only exists in this plane. It doesn't exist outside of like this physical experience. And just delving into ideas like that could actually be explained in ways that are like available to be integrated for the human brain. So the whole process of spirituality has been just like really fun and insane and hilarious. And I just use it as, I guess, a coping mechanism at the end of the day to deal with some of the harder facts of life, to deal with the ideas of death or of loss or of like understanding that you're not all you're cracked up to be, or maybe you are all cracked up. You're cracked up to be. And it's been very curious, I will say that. I'm very grateful for how it's unfolded, because if I hadn't taken those mushrooms, which I only took to prove a partner at the time that I wasn't scared of drugs.
Uh,
It was the first drug I had ever done. And I was so
that was the first drug you ever did.
yes, first drug. And
Wow.
I took way too much, but it was great. So yeah.
Holy smokes. So many things I want to ask you about that. Oh my God. Do you feel like that changed your art quite a bit? Like I see a lot of like more psychedelic type vibes in your work. Is that something that you feel like kind of launched off from that?
Oh yeah, I totally tried to be an Alex Gray copycat, like almost instantly. I was like, I understand now. I get the patterns, I get the eyes, I
Yeah.
get the fractals, the Fibonacci sequence. It all makes sense, man. I tried to be like very much into that, and then I made like 2 or 3 works that were kind of within that same sphere, and I was like, this isn't me. This
Yeah.
feels like even I think Alex Gray's work is very like obsessive and very meticulous, and I think
Mhm.
like there is something very unsettling about his work to me. Like it makes me feel unsettled, because I feel like when you're on psychedelics, at least the experiences that I have, you're very much in this like loose state where you're just like, this is how I move. Like I move with the airwaves, I move with
Yeah.
the molecules. And
It's not very structured. It's not like my experience
not
is
at all.
drugs have definitely not been very structured. It's been like the opposite
Yes,
of that.
everything is
Yeah.
like blending and with itself, and like the colors are all kind of together. You're not experiencing them as like one thing. So when I see his work, I'm like, why is everything like one thing? Why is it so
Right.
structured? And I'm like, this is not how the experience is. So it definitely influenced me in some ways. Like I definitely started to consider more out there ideas as I started to have like I really tried to document my own relationship with like consciousness and myself and like my fellow man and the world.
Yeah.
In some ways and try to grapple with some more difficult concepts like at a very horrible acid trip. The first time I did acid, I don't think it was real acid. But I trusted the person who got it, and we did it together, and he hadn't worked through a lot of the shit that he needed to, and he was kind of making it my responsibility to deal with it. So that's what made it bad. But with that came this idea of like, oh man, I am really just another person. I really am just another organism. Like I'm not anything special. And that was like a huge ego death for me. And it's something that I really had to deal with. And I couldn't figure out a way to deal with it mentally. Like I couldn't I talked to a counselor, I talked to my friends, and it just wasn't, nothing was like making sense. So I dove into this giant painting project where I made this like huge scary blood vessel woman. She was like literally made up of like molecules and blood vessels, and I gave her this like big massive like Buddha belly and crossed legs that I made out of plaster, and I put a mirror in her belly, so when you like look into the belly, you like see yourself and this whole thing. And it was a really like gnarly work, and I didn't want to keep it after. I kind of just let it sit out in the sun and lose its color, and then threw it out because I didn't like it. Like it made me feel not great. And when I showed
Right.
it at my college kind of like end of year show, this is so funny. I was like kind of just lounging by the area where it was because I was so curious to see how people would react. And this one girl turned the corner and she saw it and she jumped and she shrieked a little bit. She was
Okay.
like, ah! And I was like, yes, that's how I feel every time I look at it internally. And that's why I can't hold on to it. But it's because I kind of put all the energy of that negative trip and those negative kind of ideas into the painting so I could work through them. And I was able to work through them, but the painting had to go.
I totally get that. I struggle with that myself because I feel like in my past, especially, I had like a lot of darkness in my mind, and like I would put that on paper or in paint. And then as I've gotten older, I've tried to connect more with my spiritual side and like manifesting and all that stuff that I really believe in. And it's like I find that I would like to focus some of that energy on the canvas, but then I also find that when I do that, it sort of like manifests that energy more in my life. So I'm almost like afraid to. I don't know if that's me being like a chicken or if it's me just realizing that like whatever energy you put out there kind of comes back at you. And like, talking about like losing your religion and all that, I completely relate. For me, like I was raised Jewish, and like I am not religious in the slightest bit now, but I'm very, very spiritual. That was probably one of the harder things that I've ever had to do. Like the guilt, and being a Catholic, you understand that. Like, like,
Yes.
like the guilt associated with that, like disappointing your family, and like, and all that whole thing is really hard. Um, I'm looking at the time. I know you said you have to hard stop soon. I'm wondering if there's any other topics that you either want to talk about or bring up, or if not, while you're thinking, there was some. I know we talked at the beach like about the art business side of things. That might be a topic you want to bring up, but I'll kind of leave it to you. Whether maybe the last topic or the last subject that we'll wrap up on. Is there anything that comes to mind that's like in the forefront of your mind that you have a fun time talking about for a few minutes?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I don't know why my mind went there. Have you read Matthew McConaughey's book, Green Lights?
I think it's in my Audible list, but I haven't started it yet.
It's so funny. Everyone I talk to is like, "Yeah, I have it in my Audible, but I
Yeah,
haven't done it."
heard it's
Please read
awesome.
it. It's really good. And I didn't know what I was walking into when I bought it. I bought it in an airport, and then like four people were like, "Oh my God, amazing book. Read it."
Yeah, yeah.
And I read it and I was like, "Holy shit." And one moment that really stood out to me is how he catapulted his acting career. It was like the first real audition that he had was occurred as a result of him going to a bar and meeting the director for Dazed and Confused there, and they got drunk together, and they were just like shit-faced swapping stories. And the guy was just like, "Yeah, like I'll bring you in for an audition." And then when he went into audition, he kind of made the role his own thing and like kind of figured out who that character was supposed to be and added in the lines he thought would work, and the director
Mm,
gave him an extended role in the movie just because of that. And I think I heard that story and I was just like, how many people out there are just like, I have to wake up at 7 a.m. every day. I have to write like a piece of work for my journal. Then I have to do this and I have to do that. And this is the only way that I'm going to make it. And I'm like, this motherfucker walks into a bar,
right.
meets a random guy. They get
Shit
drunk.
face. Yeah.
Yeah. And he convinces the guy to like basically jumpstart his career. And I have had stuff like that happen to me my entire life in like different
100%.
ways,
Me too.
not to
Yeah.
jumpstart an acting career, but like everybody has. And sometimes it is just that, right? Like sometimes it's just a random circumstantial moment that maybe you manifested into existence and it's there in front of you. And it's like, here you go. Here's your opportunity. Like you have to roll with it. And those I think are even harder to deal with than these like super preparatory, super scheduled, organized ways of being because there you get this opportunity and it's like you have to do it now, like it's now or never. What are you going to do with
Yes.
it? And you have to think on your toes and you have to be present and you just have to be yourself. And it's going to work out if you act the way that you're supposed to, like in terms of you just be yourself. You're not any kind of like more meticulous, refined, polite, whatever version of yourself. You
Right.
are just wholly yourself, right?
I freaking love that. One last thing I got to jump on because I love what you're saying. I'm like so on the same fucking page with you. Like I'm like right there. But then it's like you're talking about getting a freaking corporate job. Like what the hell is going on in your head, girl?
Oh my gosh. So actually I am gonna start a corporate job in
Ah!
October. But listen to this. It's a social media job. So it's like just
Okay.
kind of like making creatives, like
Right.
the corporate side of creativity, but it's for a web comics company. So my entire job was reading romantic fiction and learning how to make that creative in terms of like marketing. And now it's going to be web comics. And the way that this job is structured is really like amazing, and I'm not above saying that I do need a source of income apart, and I do need health insurance
Yeah,
apart
for
from
sure.
jujitsu, because if I do want to make this like my art career viable, I need to have resources to fund myself. I need to have resources to buy things. I need to have resources to be able to travel and to like do these experiences. And I thankfully am going to have enough time in my schedule to be able to juggle both. But I just think it's so silly that out of all the jobs in existence, like the one corporate job I get is to do with something as silly as like romantic anime, and
Right.
then like gay basically fan fiction about satyrs that are just like in school for magic, and it's just hilarious.
Oh,
Yeah, I think I'm like okay with doing that. I'm pretty okay with my choices because I do want to be able to eat food. I feel like the starving artist trope, I've recently kind of just assumed that it's maybe a little bit outdated, because back in the day things were more affordable and people would kind of like be able to make more of a affordable living to be able to afford a place to rent and afford their food. And now it's a little bit different, where in a recession it's harder. But even with all these like little bullshit excuses, I'm pretty happy with my choices. I'm happy that I'm going to be able to have a safe structure
sure.
to be as fucking experimental as I want to be, and just like do
Awesome.
whatever the fuck I want in my studio time.
That's awesome. Well, I know you got to wrap up. I love your work. I told you, like I was diving into it before. I'm looking at it now as we chat, and I definitely think you have a lot of potential. I hope you like pursue that with the same like persistence and discipline that you have your jujitsu, because I really feel like you can do a lot of cool things. It's such a weird time right now because over the past couple of years, it's like last year, like everyone wanted to be an artist because the whole NFT thing. It was like, wait,
Oh
what?
yeah.
Like everyone's a freaking artist all of a sudden. Such a weird world. But yeah, there's so many opportunities out there, and it's cool to have like so many different things at your fingertips, So I'm glad you're kind of like seeing life as a canvas right now is kind of fun. I'm glad you're doing that. But thank you so much for making the time. This was really cool. I'm glad we had a like extended, period of time to chat. Are you coming back out to Jersey anytime soon?
I think I'll be coming back in November for
Okay.
Thanksgiving, just to
Oh,
visit my
cool.
family, and then
All right.
do my rounds, visit Emily, visit some friends. So yeah, I should be back in the area.
All right, well, maybe we can get you and Emily over and we'll have a meal again. But I'd love to
Hell
get you
yeah.
come back to the studio and we'll do some art or something together.
Yeah, that would be amazing. That would be such an awesome opportunity.
Awesome, Dom. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for the opportunity, Jay. It was great talking to
Yeah.
you.
Enjoy the rest of your day.
You too.
All right.
Bye.
See ya.